"You are fired, Lawrence. Get your things and get out of my plaza," Julian Vance sneered, his voice echoing off the glass walls of the executive suite as he tossed my late report into the trash. He smirked, leaning back in his Italian leather chair, entirely convinced he had just saved his company nearly $1 million. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply looked at him, gave a slight nod, and walked out. But what Julian Vance did not realize was that the ground beneath his feet did not belong to him. The main entry road and the electrical substation that powered Crestview Plaza sat on my personal land, and he had just triggered a clause he never bothered to read. 24 years ago, in 2002, Crestview Plaza was nothing but a blueprint on my desk. I was 27, fresh out of university, and full of energy when I joined Vanguard Property Group. The founder, Richard Vance, was a brilliant self-made real estate developer who built the firm from nothing. He took me under his wing and taught me everything about commercial leasing, property management, and asset development. Under Richard's leadership, Vanguard was built on handshakes, loyalty, and solid contracts. I spent my days negotiating triple net leases, resolving common area maintenance disputes, and managing tenant relationships. Crestview Plaza became my baby. I brought in the anchor tenant, Northwest Foods, which secured our cash flow and transformed the property into a premier retail hub. By the time the plaza reached full capacity, it was generating millions in net operating income. In 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, Vanguard Property Group was on the verge of bankruptcy. We were in the middle of expanding Crestview Plaza, but our financing dried up overnight. To make matters worse, a critical piece of land, a 0.8-acre strip that sat right between the state highway and our main retail site, was put up for auction. This strip was the only viable entry point for the plaza's main driveway and the location of our electrical transformer substation. If a competitor bought it, Vanguard would be cut off, and the entire plaza would be worthless. Richard Vance was desperate. He couldn't secure a bank loan to buy the strip, and the seller refused to offer owner financing. I couldn't stand by and watch the company crumble. I had $85,000 saved up, money my late grandfather had left me. I went to Richard and proposed a solution. I would buy the strip of land personally at the auction and then lease it back to Vanguard for a nominal fee of $1 per year. This would allow Vanguard to complete the expansion and secure its road and utility access. Richard wept with gratitude. We had our corporate counsel draft the 2008 easement agreement. Because I was giving up my personal capital to save the project, Richard insisted on adding several protective clauses. The most important one was Section 12B, titled Termination of Easement Upon Severance of Employment. It stated that the nominal lease and easement rights for the entrance road and the transformer station were strictly tied to my employment status at Vanguard. If my employment relationship with Vanguard was severed for any reason other than my voluntary resignation or retirement, the easement would immediately terminate. Vanguard would have 14 days to vacate my land, remove all their asphalt, and disconnect their utilities, after which the property would revert to my exclusive private use, with the right to block all physical access and utility transmission. It was a golden handcuff that Richard gladly signed. For 18 years, that contract sat in a secure drawer, forgotten by everyone except me. Crestview Plaza went on to become the crown jewel of Vanguard's portfolio, valued at $48 million by 2026. I became the senior commercial leasing director, earning a comfortable salary of $220,000 a year. But my contract also had a clause that Richard had put in as a reward for my loyalty. I was entitled to a 1.5% transaction commission on the sale of any Vanguard commercial asset that I had managed from inception. Then Richard retired in 2025 due to health issues, and his son, Julian Vance, took over as CEO. Julian was 32, wore tailored suits, spoke in management buzzwords, and had never spent a day actually negotiating with a tenant. He viewed the older staff as dinosaurs and wanted to pivot Vanguard into a high-leverage real estate investment trust. To Julian, my 24 years of service meant nothing. He only saw a senior employee earning a high salary and holding a contract that would pay him a $720,000 commission when Crestview Plaza was sold to Summit Equity Trust for $48 million. Julian hired a new chief financial officer, Harold Briggs, a ruthless numbers guy who looked for any excuse to trim the payroll. Together, they planned to eliminate me before the Summit Equity Trust deal closed. They wanted to pocket my commission and replace me with a junior leasing coordinator whom they could pay $50,000 a year. They didn't know about the 2008 easement agreement because the original physical files were stored in a secure archivist facility, and the digital index only listed the lease as a standard utility easement. Julian began setting traps. He assigned me impossible administrative tasks, cut my department's budget, and looked for the slightest mistake to build a paper trail for a with cause termination. The opportunity came in early January 2026. A massive snowstorm hit the region, causing power outages and roof leaks at the plaza. I spent 48 hours straight coordinating emergency repair crews, working with Northwest Foods store manager Bradley Miller to prevent $500,000 in food spoilage and ensuring the parking lot was plowed. In the chaos, I submitted the routine weekly parking lot inspection report on Wednesday instead of Monday. To Julian, this was the perfect opportunity. He called me into the executive suite, flanked by Harold Briggs. He had a file open, filled with minor administrative complaints he had compiled over the past 6 months. He was ready to pull the trigger. Julian Vance sat behind the massive mahogany desk that used to belong to his father, looking at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. Harold Briggs, the CFO, stood by the window, his arms crossed, looking out over the city skyline. The atmosphere in the room was cold, calculated, and entirely hostile. I sat in the chair opposite Julian, still exhausted from spending the last 48 hours in the freezing cold managing the plaza's blizzard recovery. My boots were damp and my hands were still rough from helping the crew clear the drainage grates. Julian tapped his fingers on a thick manila folder. "Lawrence, we've been reviewing your performance over the past 6 months, and frankly, it's not up to the standards we expect from a senior director at Vanguard," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I looked at him, keeping my expression neutral. "In what way, Julian?" I asked. "Since I took over, our net operating income at Crestview Plaza is up 4%, and we just completed lease renewals for 90% of our tenants. That's the past, Lawrence." Julian interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "We are looking at the future. We've noticed a pattern of insubordination and neglect of duty." He opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. "You submitted the weekly parking lot inspection report 2 days late this week. In commercial real estate, documentation is everything. A late report exposes us to liability. This isn't the first time either. I have recorded 3 other instances of delayed paperwork over the last 3 months." I stared at him, incredulous. "Julian, there was a historic snowstorm. The plaza was under 6 inches of ice. I spent those 48 hours on site, working alongside the plow crews and fixing the HVAC units for Northwest Foods so their refrigeration lines wouldn't freeze. If I had sat at my desk typing a report instead of managing the crisis, the anchor tenant would have lost $500,000 in spoiled meat and produce, and they would have sued us for failing to maintain the facilities." Harold Briggs stepped forward, clearing his throat. "The rules are the rules, Lawrence. We have corporate policies for a reason. If you cannot manage your administrative duties, you are unfit to lead the commercial leasing division. Furthermore, we've decided to restructure the leasing department. Your role is being eliminated. But because of your repeated failures to follow procedure, we are terminating your employment for cause, effective immediately, a termination for cause." I knew exactly what they were doing. Under Vanguard's corporate bylaws, which Julian and Harold had recently amended, any employee terminated for cause was stripped of all accrued benefits, received 0 severance pay, and most importantly, forfeited any pending transaction commissions. They were trying to rob me of my $720,000 commission on the Crestview Plaza sale to Summit Equity Trust. The closing date was only 2 weeks away, and they wanted me gone so they could keep the cash for themselves. Julian slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "This is your termination notice," he said, his smirk widening. "Sign it to acknowledge receipt. You have 30 minutes to pack your desk and leave the premises. Security will escort you out. Don't bother asking for a reference. Your dinosaur methods are no longer needed here." I looked down at the paper. The words "termination for cause" were printed in bold black ink at the top. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the urge to scream at this arrogant kid who had inherited everything and built nothing. But then I remembered the 2008 easement agreement. I remembered Section 12B, the clause that Richard Vance had insisted on to protect the man who saved his company. Julian had no idea what he had just done. He was so focused on saving a commission that he had just signed the death warrant for his $48 million deal. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the line. I didn't say a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend my record. "Understood," I said calmly. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. Julian looked slightly disappointed. He had expected me to beg, to plead, to threaten a wrongful termination lawsuit that his high-priced lawyers could easily drag out for years. He didn't know that I had a weapon that didn't require a courtroom to take effect. I walked down to my office, packed my personal belongings, a few family photos, my grandfather's old brass desk clock, and a folder of personal documents into a single cardboard box. The security guard, a man named Carl whom I had known for 10 years, looked embarrassed as he stood by my door. "I'm sorry, Lawrence," he whispered. "I'm just doing my job." "I know, Carl, no hard feelings," I replied, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Within 20 minutes, I was standing in the cold January air outside the Vanguard headquarters carrying my cardboard box. I walked to my car, placed the box in the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment listening to the engine idle. The anger had faded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I picked up my phone and called Sarah Jenkins, my personal attorney. She had been my legal counsel for 15 years and knew the history of Vanguard inside and out. "Sarah, it's Lawrence," I said. "Julian just fired me, for cause." I heard her intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, Lawrence, I'm so sorry, that ungrateful little brat. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "In fact, I've never been better. I need you to go to the vault and retrieve the original physical copy of the 2008 easement agreement for the Crestview Plaza driveway strip. It's time to draft a formal notification." Sarah was silent for a second, and then I heard the realization hit her. "Section 12B?" she asked, her voice filled with sudden excitement. "Exactly," I replied. "Let's draft the formal notice. They have 14 days to vacate my land, remove the road, and disconnect the utility lines. Send it certified mail to Julian Vance and carbon copy the legal team at Summit Equity Trust. Let's see how much they enjoy their $48 million empty shell." The morning after my termination, I met Sarah Jenkins at her office. She had a thick manila folder on her desk containing the original 2008 easement agreement. It was signed in blue ink by me and Richard Vance, with the corporate seal of Vanguard Property Group stamped on the final page. "It's even better than I remembered, Lawrence," Sarah said, sliding the document toward me. "Section 12B is ironclad. It defines the easement area precisely. The 0.8-acre strip containing the main driveway connecting Crestview Plaza to State Route 9, as well as the concrete pad and surrounding enclosure for the electrical transformer substation that powers the entire shopping center." I looked at the map attached to the agreement. The easement was a long, narrow strip of land that ran directly across the front of the plaza. Without this strip, the plaza was landlocked. There was no other access road, and the topography of the rest of the property was a steep, rocky ravine that would cost millions of dollars and years of environmental permits to grade for a new entrance. "The agreement states," Sarah continued, pointing to the text, "that upon severance of employment for any reason other than voluntary resignation, the easement terminates automatically. Vanguard has exactly 14 calendar days from the date of termination to vacate the easement area, remove all corporate property including asphalt and utility lines, and restore the land to its original state. If they fail to do so, you have the right to reclaim the land, erect physical barriers, and disconnect all utility transmission lines crossing your property." "Did you draft the notice?" I asked. "Yes," Sarah replied. "I sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested to Julian Vance's office this morning. I also sent a copy to Summit Equity Trust Legal Department, since they are the prospective buyers of the plaza." At the Vanguard headquarters, the notice arrived the following day. Julian Vance, however, was in no mood to read certified letters from a fired employee. He was in the middle of finalizing the sales agreement with Timothy Henderson, the acquisition director for Summit Equity Trust. The $48 million sale was the biggest deal of Julian's career, and he was determined to use it to cement his reputation as the new king of commercial real estate. When the mailroom delivered the letter, Julian barely glanced at it. He saw my name on the return address, scoffed, and tossed it to Harold Briggs. "Lawrence is trying to scare us with some old property agreement from his file," Julian sneered. "Have the legal department look at it when they get a chance. Probably just a standard leasing dispute. We don't have time for this. We close in 2 weeks." Harold Briggs looked at the cover letter, but since he was a finance guy and not a property attorney, he didn't understand the gravity of the easement terms. He forwarded the email scan to a junior corporate lawyer, telling him to handle it. The junior lawyer, overwhelmed with the paperwork for the upcoming sale, added it to his pile of pending files, intending to look at it after the closing. While Vanguard ignored the warning, I was busy making preparations. I hired Apex Surveying to map out the exact boundaries of my 0.8-acre strip. I also contacted Green Valley Construction, a local contractor run by an old high school friend of mine, to rent 30 heavy concrete jersey barriers and a crew to install them. I paid a $5,000 deposit to secure their availability for Monday, January 25th, the day the 14-day notice period expired. Next, I made a call to Mid-Atlantic Power and Grid, the utility company that operated the electrical substation on the easement strip. I requested a meeting with their regional director, explaining that the land easement for the substation was terminating. The utility company's legal counsel took the matter very seriously. They reviewed the 2008 easement agreement and realized that if they continued to transmit electricity through my property after the easement expired, they would be guilty of civil trespass and could be held liable for damages. "Mr. Fletcher, our legal team has reviewed the document," the regional director told me over the phone. "Under Section 12B, we cannot legally operate the substation on your land once the easement is terminated. We cannot risk a trespass lawsuit from a private landowner. We are scheduling a crew to disconnect the substation's main distribution line to the plaza on the morning of January 25th. We will notify Vanguard that they must arrange for an alternative power source. Did they notify Vanguard? I asked. Yes. We sent a formal notification to their operations department yesterday, the director confirmed, but they replied that they would resolve it after their property sale closes. They don't seem to realize that we will shut down the power grid regardless of their transaction schedule. I smiled. Julian Vance's arrogance had blinded him. He was so focused on the $48 million payout that he was ignoring the alarms sounding all around him. As the days ticked down, I monitored the progress of the Summit Equity Trust deal through my contacts in the industry. The buyers had completed their physical inspections, and their title insurance company was doing a final run. Because the easement was registered under my personal LLC, L&F Realty Solutions, and had been leased to Vanguard for 18 years, the title search only showed a valid active utility and access as easement. The title company assumed the easement was permanent because they didn't have the private employment contract that tied the easement to my job status. On Friday, January 22nd, the junior lawyer at Vanguard finally got around to reviewing the letter Sarah had sent. He read Section 12B and his face went pale. He immediately ran to Harold Briggs' office. "Mr. Briggs, we have a massive problem," the lawyer stammered, placing the 2008 agreement on the desk. "This letter from Lawrence Fletcher isn't a minor dispute. If we fired him, his land easement for the entrance road in the substation is void. We have to restore the land by Monday." Harold Briggs frowned, looking up from his spreadsheet. "What do you mean void? We own the plaza, but we don't own the entrance road or the land under the transformer station," the lawyer explained, his voice shaking. "Lawrence owns it, and since we fired him, he is terminating the easement. If he blocks the road, the plaza is landlocked. Summit Equity Trust won't buy a property that has no legal access road or electricity." Briggs felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He grabbed the document and marched straight into Julian Vance's office. On Monday, January 25, 2026, at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, the winter sun had not yet risen. Crestview Plaza was dark. Suddenly, the streetlights surrounding the property flickered and went out. Inside Northwest Foods, the high-pitched hum of the massive industrial refrigeration units died, replaced by the mechanical roar of emergency backup generators. The power company had disconnected the substation. At 7 o'clock, 3 flatbed trucks from Green Valley Construction rumbled onto the main access driveway. They were loaded with 30 heavy concrete jersey barriers. A crew of workers, guided by the surveyor's bright orange stakes, began unloading the barriers, placing them in a neat, impassable row directly across the entrance road. They erected a large metal sign that read, "Private property, land owned by L&F Realty Solutions LLC, no trespass. Violators will be prosecuted." By 8 o'clock, the morning rush hour was in full swing and chaos erupted. Delivery trucks carrying fresh produce and dairy for Northwest Foods were backed up onto the state highway, their hazard lights flashing. Commuters trying to enter the plaza's parking lot for their morning coffee were forced to turn around. Bradley Miller, the store manager for Northwest Foods, stood outside the darkened supermarket, wrapped in a thick winter coat. The store's emergency generators could only power the cash registers and basic emergency lighting, not the massive freezer aisles. He was losing thousands of dollars in business every hour, and if the temperature in the freezers rose, he would have to discard $500,000 worth of inventory. Bradley was furious. He tried to call Julian Vance, but Julian's phone was busy. He then called the local police department, demanding they remove the barriers blocking his delivery trucks. 2 police cruisers arrived at the entrance where I was standing with Sarah Jenkins. Julian Vance and Harold Briggs arrived shortly after, screeching to a halt in Julian's luxury sedan. Julian leapt out of the car, his face red with rage, his expensive coat flapping in the wind. "Lawrence, what the hell is the meaning of this?" Julian screamed, marching toward me. "Get these barriers out of here right now. You are blocking public access to our property." "This isn't public access, Julian," I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. "This is private property. Specifically, it belongs to L&F Realty Solutions LLC, which I own. Your easement lease terminated at midnight because you terminated my employment." "You're insane," Julian yelled, turning to the police officers. "Officer, arrest this man. He is trespassing on our property and blocking our business." One of the officers, a veteran sergeant, stepped between us. "Calm down, sir," the sergeant said. "We've already reviewed the property deeds and the easement agreement provided by Mr. Fletcher's attorney. The land beneath this driveway belongs to him. The agreement states that the easement terminated when he was fired. According to the law, he has the right to block access to his own land. This is a civil matter, and we will not remove the barriers." Julian stared at the officer, his mouth open in disbelief. But we have a commercial plaza here." They have to have access. Then you should have negotiated a new lease with the landowner before you fired him, Sarah Jenkins said, stepping forward. You had 14 days' notice, Julian. You chose to ignore it. Now your company is trespassing. If you attempt to move these barriers, we will file a criminal trespass complaint and seek an immediate injunction. While Julian was arguing with the police, a black SUV pulled up to the barricade. Timothy Henderson, the acquisition director for Summit Equity Trust, stepped out of the vehicle. He was supposed to meet Julian at 9 o'clock for the final pre-closing walkthrough of the plaza. He looked at the concrete barriers, the backed-up delivery trucks, the police cruisers, and the dark, unpowered shopping center. Julian, Timothy Henderson said, his voice flat and dangerous as he walked over. What is going on here? Why is the plaza dark, and why is the entrance blocked by concrete barriers? Julian panicked, sweat beads forming on his forehead despite the freezing cold. Timothy, it's nothing, he stammered. Just a minor administrative dispute with a disgruntled former employee. My lawyers are handling it. It will be resolved by this afternoon. This doesn't look like a minor dispute, Timothy said, pointing to the police sergeant and the concrete wall. Our contract states that Vanguard must deliver Crestview Plaza with clear title, unrestricted physical access, and fully operational utilities. You are currently in breach of all 3 warranties. Summit Equity Trust will not close on a property that has no legal entrance road and no electricity. If this isn't resolved within 48 hours, we are pulling out of the $48 million deal, and we will sue Vanguard for the $4.8 million breach penalty. Timothy turned on his heel, got back into his SUV, and drove away. Julian looked like he was about to faint. Harold Briggs grabbed his arm to steady him. Julian, we have to talk, Briggs whispered, his voice trembling. If Summit Equity pulls out and Northwest Foods sues us for business interruption, we are ruined. Northwest Foods' contract has a $50,000 per day penalty for access blockage. We are facing millions in liabilities by the end of the week. Julian looked at me, the arrogance completely gone from his eyes. Lawrence, please, he begged, his voice cracking. Let's sit down and talk. We can work this out. I'll give you your job back. My job? I laughed, a short, cold sound. I don't want my job back, Julian. You made it clear that my dinosaur methods are no longer needed. We can negotiate a new easement lease, Julian pleaded. Just tell me what you want. I looked at him, then at Sarah. My attorney will handle all communications, I said. We will meet tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at Sarah's office. Don't be late, and bring your father. Without waiting for his response, I walked to my car, leaving Julian and Harold standing in the cold, staring at the concrete wall that had just brought their real estate empire to a grinding halt. At 10 o'clock the next morning, the conference room in Sarah Jenkins' office was tense. Julian Vance and Harold Briggs sat on one side of the glass table, looking exhausted and defeated. But they weren't alone. Sitting at the head of the table was Richard Vance, the 68-year-old founder of Vanguard Property Group. He looked frail, his breathing slightly labored, but his eyes were sharp and filled with a cold, simmering fury directed entirely at his son. I sat opposite them with Sarah Jenkins next to me, a neat stack of legal documents arranged before her. Richard looked at me, a soft, apologetic expression softening his face. Lawrence, he said, his voice gravelly but firm, I cannot tell you how sorry I am. When I retired, I believed my son had the intelligence to run the company I built. I was wrong. He let greed and arrogance blind him to the very principles that made Vanguard successful. Loyalty. Lawrence. We built this company on loyalty. Thank you, Richard, I said quietly. I always respected our time working together. Richard turned to Julian, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You absolute fool. You fired the man who saved this company in 2008 to save a commission. You didn't even bother to audit the property files. You almost bankrupted Vanguard in a single morning. The board has met, Julian. As of 9 o'clock this morning, you are stripped of your title as CEO. You are suspended from all operational duties at Vanguard, pending a full audit of your department. Julian looked down at his hands, his face pale, unable to meet his father's gaze. Harold Briggs sat in silence, staring at his notepad, trying to distance himself from the disaster. Now, Richard said, turning back to me. How do we resolve this, Lawrence? Summit Equity Trust has given us 24 hours to clear the title and restore access, or they pull out of the $48 million purchase and sue us. Bradley Miller from Northwest Foods has already filed a notice of intent to sue for business interruption. What are your terms? Sarah Jenkins slid a document across the table. These are our terms for the settlement and the sale of the 0.8-acre easement strip, she said. Harold Briggs picked up the document and read the terms aloud, his voice cracking slightly as he went down the list. First, Vanguard Property Group will purchase the 0.8-acre easement strip from L&F Realty Solutions LLC for $2,500,000. Second, Vanguard will pay Lawrence Fletcher his contractually mandated 1.5% transaction commission on the Crestview Plaza sale, which amounts to $720,000. Third, Vanguard will pay Lawrence Fletcher his full annual salary of $220,000 as severance pay, acknowledging that his termination was without cause. Fourth, Vanguard will cover all of Mr. Fletcher's legal fees, totaling $35,000. Fifth, Julian Vance will permanently resign from Vanguard Property Group and forfeit his shares to the corporate treasury. Briggs stopped reading, looking at Julian, then at Richard. The total financial payout to Lawrence Fletcher is $3,475,000. This is extortion. Julian burst out, slamming his hand on the table. We bought that land for $85,000. He's charging us a 3,000% markup. We can't pay this. Shut up, Julian. Richard snapped, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. We aren't paying for the land. We are paying for your stupidity. If we don't buy this strip today, the $48 million deal falls through. We will owe Summit Equity Trust a $4.8 million breach penalty. Northwest Foods will sue us for millions more. Vanguard will go into foreclosure by next month. We have no choice. Richard looked at Harold Briggs. Do we have the cash reserves to cover the purchase of the land? Yes, Mr. Vance, Briggs said quietly. We have the liquidity, but it will drain our development fund. Direct the funds, Richard ordered. Prepare the wire transfers immediately. Julian slumped back in his chair, completely broken. The arrogance that had defined him for the past year had evaporated, replaced by the grim realization that his career in real estate was over. His father had ousted him, his reputation was ruined, and he would be remembered as the man who lost a $48 million plaza over a late parking report. Within 3 hours, the legal documents were signed and the wire transfers were executed. Sarah Jenkins monitored her bank portal until she saw the confirmation. $3,475,000 had cleared into L&F Realty Solutions LLC's account. It's done, Lawrence, Sarah smiled, showing me the screen. The funds are fully cleared. I stood up and shook Richard Vance's hand. Thank you, Richard. I'm sorry it had to end this way. So am I, Lawrence. Richard sighed, a tired smile on his face. But you did what you had to do. Go enjoy your retirement. You earned it. I walked out of the office and called the crew at Green Valley Construction. Remove the barriers, I told my friend. The road is open. I also called Mid-Atlantic Power and Grid and informed them that the easement had been sold to Vanguard, allowing them to reconnect the substation to the plaza. By that afternoon, the lights at Crestview Plaza were back on. The delivery trucks rolled in, the shoppers returned, and 2 days later, the $48 million sale to Summit Equity Trust closed successfully. I retired at 51. With over $3.5 million in the bank, I didn't need to work another day in my life. I bought a small house overlooking the lake, far away from the corporate boardrooms and the stress of property management. Sometimes I still drive past Crestview Plaza, watching the busy shoppers and the trucks rolling down the entrance road. I smile, remembering the lesson Richard Vance taught me all those years ago. Always protect your assets and never underestimate the value of a solid contract. The young guys in their tailored suits think they can run the world with spreadsheets and buzzwords, but they forget that the old dinosaurs are the ones who laid the foundation. And if you try to starve a dinosaur, you might just find out who really owns the ground you stand on.